My aunt convinced everyone I was schizophrenic to hide that my cousin was still alive, so I recorded her confession and found the basement room where she'd been keeping him for 3 years. The voice came through the air vent at 3:14 a.m., and I knew immediately it was Lucas. Not a memory, not a hallucination. His actual voice, hoarse and desperate, saying my name. Quote, I sat up in bed in my aunt's guest room, heart hammering against my ribs, staring at the heating vent near the floor. Lucas had been dead for 3 years. I'd attended his funeral. I'd watched his mother, my Aunt Patricia, collapse at the graveside while the pastor read the eulogy. I'd taken antipsychotic medication for 18 months because I kept insisting I'd seen him after his supposed death, kept hearing his voice, kept finding evidence that he was alive. Everyone said I was having a psychotic break triggered by grief. The doctors said schizophrenia often manifested in the early 20s. My parents said I needed help. And eventually, after enough therapy and medication and concerned interventions, I'd agreed with them. I'd accepted that my cousin was dead and my grief had broken my mind. But that voice, that was Lucas, and it was coming from somewhere inside this house. I'd been Lucas's closest friend since childhood, practically brothers despite being cousins. We'd grown up 3 houses apart in Fairfield, spent every summer building forts in the woods behind our street, survived middle school together, shared a dorm room freshman year at State before he transferred to University of Michigan for engineering. Lucas was brilliant, the kind of person who could explain quantum physics using household objects and make it actually interesting. He'd landed an internship at Tesla his junior year, came home for Thanksgiving 2020, talking about electric motor design and Elon Musk's management style. That was the last normal conversation we ever had. 3 days later, on November 29, 2020, Lucas went missing. He'd told his mother he was going to meet a friend at the climbing gym, left the house at 11:30 a.m., and vanished. His car was found 2 days later in the parking lot of Riverside Park, 15 miles from home, keys still in the ignition, his wallet and phone on the passenger seat. No signs of struggle, no note, no witnesses. The police searched the park extensively, dragged the river, combed the trails, interviewed everyone who'd been there that day. Nothing. Lucas had simply disappeared into thin air. His mother, my Aunt Patricia, fell apart. She'd been raising him alone since his father died when Lucas was 12, poured everything into making sure he succeeded. When he vanished, something broke inside her. 3 weeks after Lucas went missing, police found a body in the river downstream from Riverside Park. Decomposition made identification difficult, but the height and build matched. Dental records were inconclusive. The body had been in the water too long, significant trauma to the jaw. But Patricia insisted it was Lucas. She needed closure, needed to bury her son and begin grieving. The police, pressured by a grieving mother and lacking resources to continue searching indefinitely, officially closed the case. Lucas Brennan was declared dead, and we held the funeral on January 8, 2021. I stood at that graveside feeling wrong about everything. The body they'd found was too decomposed for open casket. The dental records weren't definitive, and something about Patricia's grief felt performative rather than genuine. Too controlled, too precise in its expressions. But I was 22 years old, devastated by losing my closest friend. And everyone told me I was looking for reasons to deny reality because acceptance hurt too much. So I buried my doubts, along with whoever was in that casket. 2 weeks later, I started seeing Lucas. At the grocery store, standing in the produce section. Walking down the street outside my apartment. In the reflection of a store window. Each time I'd run after him, call his name, lose him in a crowd or around a corner. My parents took me to a psychiatrist doctor, Raymond Fletcher, who'd been practicing for 19 years and specialized in grief-related mental health crises. Dr. Fletcher diagnosed me with acute grief reaction with psychotic features after 3 sessions. Quote, "01, he explained during our 4th meeting. Quote 2. He prescribed risperidone, an antipsychotic medication. Quote 3. I took the medication for 6 months. The visions didn't stop. If anything, they intensified. I'd wake up hearing Lucas calling my name. I'd find things moved in my apartment that I swore I hadn't touched. I'd discover text messages on my phone that appeared to be from Lucas's number, saying he needed help, saying he was trapped. When I showed these messages to Dr. Fletcher, he explained that I was likely sending them to myself during dissociative episodes and forgetting. When I insisted I wasn't capable of that, my parents gently suggested I move back home for a while so they could monitor my condition. Patricia visited frequently during those months, always asking about my symptoms with concerned intensity. "Are you still seeing him?" she'd ask, leaning forward in her chair, eyes searching my face. Quote 5. When I said yes, she'd exchange glances with my mother, her expression a mixture of pity and something else I couldn't identify. Fear? Calculation? The medication made me foggy, disconnected, but it didn't stop the conviction that Lucas was alive somewhere. I began researching the case independently, digging through police reports, interviewing people who'd been at Riverside Park that day, examining photos of the body they'd found. The more I investigated, the less convinced I became that the body was Lucas. The height was right, but the weight was off by nearly 30 pounds. The clothing was wrong. Lucas never wore cargo pants, but the body had been wearing them. And the timing felt suspicious. Lucas disappeared on November 29th, but the body wasn't found until December 19th. 3 weeks in winter water should have preserved it better than the advanced decomposition suggested. I compiled all of this information, organized it into a presentation, and showed it to my parents and Dr. Fletcher. They increased my medication dosage and suggested inpatient treatment. Quote, Dr. Fletcher said gently. Quote, 7. I refused inpatient treatment, but agreed to continue outpatient therapy and medication. Deep down, I was starting to doubt myself. Maybe they were right. Maybe my mind had broken, and I was clinging to conspiracy theories to avoid facing the truth. By early 2022, 18 months after Lucas's supposed death, I'd stopped openly talking about my suspicions. I'd learned that insisting your dead cousin is alive gets you labeled as delusional, and your family starts discussing involuntary commitment. I went through the motions AR's therapy sessions where I pretended to accept Lucas's death, medication I secretly stopped taking after realizing it didn't change what I was experiencing, and family dinners where I smiled and nodded while Patricia described her grief journey, and my mother sympathetically discussed my recovery from psychosis. But privately, I kept a journal documenting every strange occurrence. Timestamps, descriptions, photographs. I'd wake up at odd hours and find my door unlocked when I knew I'd locked it. I'd discover food missing from my pantry in quantities too large to forget eating. I'd hear footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment at 2 a.m., pause outside my door, then walk away. And always, the feeling that someone was watching me, testing me, waiting to see if I'd figure it out. In March 2022, Patricia asked if I'd come stay with her for a few weeks. "I'm struggling with the anniversary," she said, referring to what would have been Lucas's 25th birthday. Quote, 10. My mother encouraged it, saying it would be good for both of us. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Patricia's house was a 2-story colonial in Meadowbrook, the kind of neighborhood where everyone kept their lawns immaculate and no one talked about problems. She'd lived there since Lucas was 8, raised him in that house after her husband's death, maintained it perfectly even after losing her son. Or supposedly losing her son. Something about staying there felt wrong from the first night. The guest room was at the end of the upstairs hallway, farthest from Patricia's master bedroom, and the house had strange acoustics, sounds that should have been muffled, carried clearly through walls and floors. I'd hear Patricia moving around at odd hours, footsteps in the basement at 1 a.m., doors opening and closing in a pattern that felt too regular to be random. When I asked her about it, she laughed it off. "Old house noises, Ethan, and I have insomnia. Grief does that. I wander around sometimes because lying in bed thinking about Lucas is worse than staying busy." It was plausible, believable. Except I'd known Patricia my entire life, and she'd never had insomnia before. She'd always slept like the dead, joked about how nothing woke her up. Now she was wandering the house at all hours? The first week, I tried to ignore the inconsistencies. She was grieving. People changed after loss. But then I started noticing other things. The basement door was always locked, and Patricia carried the only key on a chain around her neck. The grocery bills were enormous for a single woman. I saw receipts for $400 purchases twice a week. And sometimes, when she thought I wasn't paying attention, I'd catch her staring at me with an expression that wasn't grief or concern. It was assessment, like she was waiting for me to do something specific. On my 9th night at Patricia's house, I woke at 3:14 a.m. to Lucas's voice coming through the heating vent. I didn't move, didn't call out, didn't react in any way that could be observed. I just lay there in the darkness, listening. Quote 12. His voice broke on the last sentence. 3 years I'd been told I was hallucinating Lucas's voice. 3 years of medication, therapy, doubt, and shame. And he was alive, imprisoned in his own mother's basement, calling for help through the heating system. The rage that surged through me was so intense I had to bite down on my hand to keep from screaming. Patricia had done this. She'd faked her son's death, framed me as mentally ill to discredit me when I insisted he was alive, and kept Lucas locked in her basement for 3 years. The audacity, the calculation, the absolute sociopathic control required to maintain that lie, I couldn't comprehend it. But I also couldn't react. If Patricia knew I'd heard Lucas, she'd either move him or do something worse. I needed proof. Irrefutable, documented proof that would expose everything she'd done. I spent the next day acting completely normal. Made breakfast, chatted with Patricia about her plans for the afternoon, mentioned I was thinking about looking for a new apartment soon since I was, quote, 13, quote. She smiled and said she was glad to hear it, that having me around had been therapeutic for her too. All the while I was planning. I needed to record Patricia confessing. I needed to access the basement and document Lucas's imprisonment. I needed to do both without alerting her, without giving her time to cover her tracks or create a narrative where I was the unstable one breaking into her property. That evening, I went to Best Buy and bought a digital voice recorder, the kind journalists use, small enough to fit in a pocket. I tested it in my car to ensure the audio quality would be clear enough to capture conversations. Then I researched the legal requirements for recording in our state, one-party consent, meaning I could legally record any conversation I was part of without the other person's knowledge. That night at 11:30 p.m., I heard Patricia go down to the basement. I crept to the top of the stairs, voice recorder running in my pajama pocket, and listened. The basement door unlocked. I heard the deadbolt sliding, keys jingling. Then Patricia's footsteps descending the stairs, and her voice, clear and cold. "I brought you dinner. Stop crying, Lucas. It doesn't change anything." Lucas's voice, muffled. Quote, 15. Patricia laughed. Actually laughed. Quote, 16. I pressed myself against the wall at the top of the stairs, recorder capturing every word. Quote, 17, Lucas asked. His voice sounded thin, damaged in a way that made my chest ache. 3 years in a basement. 3 years of isolation, imprisonment, psychological torture. Quote, 18, Patricia said flatly. Quote, 19. There was a crash, like a tray hitting the floor. Quote, 20. Quote, 21, Patricia hissed. Quote, 22. My hands were shaking so badly the recorder nearly slipped from my pocket. I steadied it, kept recording. Quote, 23, Lucas asked. Quote, 24. Quote, 25, Patricia said. Her voice had gone flat, emotionless. Quote, 26. I backed away from the stairs as quietly as possible, heart hammering so hard I thought Patricia might hear it from the basement. She'd just threatened to kill me. Casually discussed murdering her own nephew to protect her secret. I made it back to the guest room, locked the door, and shoved a chair under the handle. Then I sat on the bed with the voice recorder and listened to the entire conversation again to make sure it had captured clearly. It had. Every word. Patricia's confession to faking Lucas's death, imprisoning him, gaslighting me into believing I was mentally ill, and her threat to kill me if necessary. This was evidence. This was enough to go to the police. But I still needed to find Lucas, to document his physical condition and the basement room where he was being held. And I needed to do it before Patricia realized I knew the truth. I texted my parents at 6:30 a.m. with a cover story. Not feeling great today. Think I might have caught a flu. Going to rest here at Aunt Patricia's for another day or two until I feel better. My mother responded immediately with concern and offers to bring soup. I declined, saying Patricia was taking good care of me. Then I texted my best friend Jeremy, who lived 20 minutes away. Emergency. Can't explain over text. Need you to be ready to call police if I don't contact you by 6 p.m. today. If you don't hear from me, tell them I'm at Patricia Brennan's house and I might be in danger. Jeremy knew about my history with Lucas's death, knew I'd been diagnosed with psychosis. His response was cautious. Ethan, are you okay? Is this real or are you having an episode? I replied, I've been recording. I have proof. Lucas is alive. Just trust me on this, please. After a long pause. Okay, 6 p.m. Stay safe. Patricia left the house at 9:15 a.m. to run errands. I watched from the guest room window as her Lexus pulled out of the driveway, then I moved. The basement key was on her keyring, which she'd taken with her, but I'd been planning for this. I went to her bedroom and found her emergency spare keys in the nightstand drawer. She was meticulous about backups, always had been. The basement key was there, attached to a small red keychain. I grabbed it, along with my phone, and headed downstairs. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the basement door. The staircase descended into darkness, and I fumbled for the light switch. Fluorescent lights flickered on, illuminating a finished basement that looked completely normal. Storage boxes, old furniture, a water heater in the corner. Nothing suggested anyone was being held prisoner down here. Then I noticed the false wall. It was subtle, professionally done, but the seam was visible if you knew where to look. The wall at the far end of the basement, behind the storage shelves, was actually a door. I moved the shelves aside. They were on wheels, designed to roll easily, and found the lock. The same key that opened the basement door fit this lock too. I took a deep breath, turned my phone's camera to video mode, and opened the hidden door. The room beyond was approximately 12 feet by 15 feet, with concrete walls, a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, and a cot in the corner. Lucas was sitting on the cot, staring at me with hollow eyes. He'd lost at least 40 pounds since I'd last seen him. His hair had grown long and unkempt, his beard scraggly. But it was definitely Lucas, my cousin, my best friend, who I'd been told was dead for 3 years. Ethan, he said, his voice cracking. You heard me. I didn't think you'd believe it was real. I was filming everything, documenting the room, the conditions, Lucas's physical state. Quote, 34. I said, my own voice unsteady. Quote, 35. Lucas stood up, unsteady on his feet. Quote, 36. The camera captured everything. The bucket he'd been using as a toilet, the minimal food supplies, the makeshift calendar he'd scratched into the wall showing 1,095 days. 3 years. 1,095 days of imprisonment in his own mother's basement. I felt sick. We're getting you out, I said. Right now. I have her confession recorded. I have video evidence of this room. We're going to the police and she's going to prison for the rest of her life. I helped Lucas up the basement stairs. He was weak, malnourished, his legs unsteady after years of minimal movement. We made it to the main floor, and I was reaching for my phone to call 911 when I heard the front door unlock. Patricia was home early. She walked into the living room carrying grocery bags, saw Lucas and me standing there, and froze. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Patricia carefully set down the grocery bags and smiled. That smile was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. Calm, calculated, completely devoid of panic. She said in that same gentle voice she'd used during my worst moments of doubt, "You've broken into my basement, and you're hallucinating Lucas again. This is serious, sweetheart. We need to get you to the hospital." She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling Dr. Fletcher right now. We'll get you the help you need." Lucas grabbed my arm. "Don't let her do this. Don't let her convince you you're crazy again." But I was already holding up my phone, where the video of Lucas's prison cell was still queued up. Quote, 43. Patricia's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in her eyes. Quote, 44. She took a step closer. Quote, 45. She looked at him with absolute coldness. Quote, 46. I could feel it happening. The same gaslighting, the same reality-warping manipulation she'd used for 3 years. The way she spoke with such certainty, such apparent concern, made me want to doubt what I was seeing even though Lucas was physically touching my arm. But I'd prepared for this. I turned my phone toward her, showing the video I'd recorded in the basement. "Then explain this," I said. "Explain why my hallucination has a physical body, why he appears on camera, why the room I found matches exactly what he described." I pressed play on the audio recording from last night, and Patricia's voice filled the room. Quote 49. Her face went pale. Quote 50. Quote 51. I backed toward the door, pulling Lucas with me. Quote 52. Patricia moved fast for someone in her 50s. She lunged for my phone, trying to grab it out of my hand. Lucas stepped between us, and she shoved him so hard he fell backward into the coffee table. That was when I ran. Straight out the front door with my phone and the voice recorder, leaving Lucas to follow as fast as he could. I heard Patricia screaming behind us, something about how I was destroying evidence during a psychotic break, how I needed to be stopped for my own safety. I made it to my car, Lucas climbing into the passenger seat, and I drove straight to the Meadowbrook police station with Patricia's Lexus following us the entire way. I pulled into the police parking lot at 11:08 a.m., Lucas beside me looking like a ghost, and Patricia parking right behind us. I grabbed my phone and the recorder and walked into the station. The desk sergeant looked up as I approached. "I need to report a kidnapping and false imprisonment," I said, my voice somehow steady despite the adrenaline shaking through my system. "This is Lucas Brennan. He was reported dead 3 years ago. His mother has been holding him prisoner in her basement since November 2020. I have recorded evidence of her confession and video documentation of his imprisonment." The sergeant's eyes widened as he looked between me and Lucas. Patricia came through the door behind us, and her entire demeanor changed. She started crying, reaching for Lucas with trembling hands. She turned to the sergeant. Quote 56. She was performing perfectly, the shocked mother, the grieving parent confronted with a miracle. If I hadn't known the truth, I would have believed her. The desk sergeant, whose nameplate read, Officer James Whitmore, 12 years service, looked completely overwhelmed. "Ma'am, sir, I'm going to need you all to come back to an interview room. This is complicated." He called for backup, and 2 other officers appeared. "I need Detective Dawson down here immediately, and someone get social services on the line. We have a potential kidnapping victim who's been missing for 3 years." Detective Rachel Dawson arrived within 15 minutes. She was 46 years old according to the bio I found later, had been with the Meadowbrook Police Department for 22 years, and specialized in missing persons cases. She'd actually worked Lucas's original disappearance in 2020. She took one look at Lucas and went white. "That's Lucas Brennan," she said. "We declared him dead. We closed that case." Lucas nodded weakly. "I've been in my mother's basement the entire time. She faked my death and kept me locked in a hidden room." Dawson looked at Patricia, who was still performing shocked grief. "Ms. Brennan, is this true? Your son has been in your home this entire time?" Patricia shook her head frantically. "No, absolutely not. I don't know what's happening. I buried my son 3 years ago. This must be some kind of mistake or—" She looked at me with calculated sadness. "Detective, my nephew Ethan has been diagnosed with schizophrenia related to Lucas's death. He's been having delusions for years about Lucas being alive. I don't know what's happening right now, but Ethan is very sick. He needs psychiatric help, not police intervention." I pulled out my phone and voice recorder. "I have proof," I said. "Last night, I recorded Patricia in her basement talking to Lucas. She confessed to faking his death, to keeping him imprisoned, to gaslighting me into believing I was mentally ill so no one would believe me when I said he was alive." I handed the recorder to Detective Dawson. "This is her confession, every word." Dawson took the recorder and my phone. "Officer Whitmore, separate these 3 into different rooms. No one talks to each other until I've reviewed this evidence. And someone get a medical team to examine Mr. Brennan. If he's been held captive for 3 years, he'll need immediate medical attention." They put me in interview room A, Lucas in interview room B with a paramedic, and Patricia in interview room C. I sat alone for 90 minutes while Dawson listened to the recording and reviewed the video evidence. When she finally came back, her expression was a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Mr. Reeves," she said, sitting across from me, "the recording and video you provided are extremely disturbing. Patricia Brennan's voice is clearly identifiable, and the confession is explicit. However, I need to ask you some questions to establish the chain of custody for this evidence and confirm the circumstances under which it was obtained. She walked me through everything, when I'd arrived at Patricia's house, what I'd observed, when and how I'd recorded the conversation, how I'd found the basement room. She said carefully. I'd been waiting for this question. I was diagnosed with acute psychosis by Dr. Raymond Fletcher in early 2021 after I insisted Lucas was alive. I took antipsychotic medication for 18 months, but I stopped because the medication didn't change what I was experiencing. I've been in outpatient therapy, but I stopped attending after realizing the therapy was designed to make me accept that Lucas was dead rather than help me investigate why I kept finding evidence he was alive. I met her eyes directly. Detective, everything I experienced that was labeled psychosis was Patricia manipulating me. The sightings of Lucas were either real or staged to make me seem delusional. The text messages from his phone were real. She had his phone and was sending them to test if I'd report them. Every symptom I displayed was a rational response to gaslighting and manipulation, not mental illness. Dawson made notes. The medical examination of Lucas Brennan is ongoing. Preliminary findings show severe malnutrition, muscle atrophy consistent with prolonged immobilization, and psychological trauma. His physical condition supports his claim of extended captivity. I'm going to bring in the FBI. This case involves kidnapping across state lines, fraud related to death certificates and insurance claims, and potential federal charges. She stood up. Mr. Reeves, you're not being charged with anything. You potentially saved your cousin's life today, but I need you to stay available for further questioning and testimony. They arrested Patricia at 2:37 p.m. FBI Special Agent Thomas Delancey took lead on the federal case, coordinating with local authorities to charge Patricia with kidnapping, false imprisonment, conspiracy to commit fraud, insurance fraud. She'd collected on a small life insurance policy after Lucas's supposed death, and obstruction of justice. The evidence was overwhelming. My recording of Patricia's confession, video documentation of the basement prison, Lucas's testimony about 3 years of captivity, medical evidence of prolonged imprisonment, forensic analysis of the fake death certificate, and the misidentified body from the river. Patricia's defense attorney tried arguing that she'd been suffering from a psychological break after her son's disappearance, that she'd created an elaborate delusion where he was alive in her basement. But the premeditation was too clear. The construction of the hidden room, the ongoing grocery purchases for 2 people, the systematic gaslighting of me to prevent discovery. This wasn't delusion. This was calculated, methodical imprisonment. Lucas was hospitalized for 3 weeks, receiving treatment for malnutrition, muscle rehabilitation, and intensive psychological counseling. I visited every day, and we slowly rebuilt the trust that Patricia had tried to destroy. Quote 78, he told me during one visit. Quote 79, the trial started in August 2023, 9 months after I'd found Lucas. The prosecution presented a timeline of Patricia's crimes starting with Lucas's kidnapping on November 29, 2020. They showed how she'd lured him home with a fake emergency, drugged him, and imprisoned him in the basement room she'd constructed months earlier after he'd announced his Tesla internship. They detailed how she'd staged his disappearance, planted his car at Riverside Park, and pressured police to close the case when they found an unidentified body. They documented how she'd collected $50,000 from a life insurance policy, filing fraudulent death certificate paperwork. And they showed how she'd systematically destroyed my credibility when I insisted Lucas was alive, feeding information to Dr. Fletcher that painted me as delusional, staging incidents to reinforce my supposed psychosis, and maintaining constant surveillance to ensure I never got close enough to discover Lucas. The defense tried portraying Patricia as a grieving mother who'd had a psychological breakdown. They brought in psychiatrists who testified about complicated grief and delusional disorders. They suggested the basement room was a shrine to her dead son, that she'd created an elaborate fantasy to cope with loss. But then the prosecution played my recording. Patricia's voice, cold and calculated, explaining exactly why she'd imprisoned Lucas and how she'd manipulated me. Quote 80. No jury could hear that and believe she was delusional. The verdict came back after 8 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all charges: kidnapping, false imprisonment, fraud, obstruction of justice, conspiracy. The sentencing hearing was set for October. Patricia's attorney requested leniency based on her lack of prior criminal history and her obvious mental health issues. Lucas testified at the sentencing hearing. He'd gained back most of the weight he'd lost, looked healthier physically, but you could see the damage in his eyes. "My mother stole 3 years of my life," he said, his voice steady but strained. "She kept me in a basement room with no sunlight, minimal human contact, barely enough food to survive. She told me daily that no one was looking for me, that everyone believed I was dead, that I'd be in that room until I died. She made me believe I'd never see daylight again, never finish college, never have a career or a family or any kind of life." He looked directly at Patricia, who sat at the defense table showing no emotion. "And when my cousin tried to save me, when Ethan insisted I was alive, she destroyed his mental health to protect her secret. She convinced doctors, family, everyone that he was schizophrenic. She stole his credibility, his sanity, his future. She did all of this because I wanted to leave home for a job opportunity, because I wanted independence. That's not love, that's ownership, and it almost killed both of us." Judge Elizabeth Kowalski, who'd been on the bench for 29 years, sentenced Patricia to 45 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. Quote, 85. Kowalski said. Quote, 86. Patricia was 61 years old when she was sentenced. Even with good behavior, she'd be in her 80s before parole eligibility. She'd spend the rest of her functional life in prison. As the bailiffs led her away in handcuffs, she looked at Lucas one last time and said, quote, 87. Lucas didn't respond. "What do you say to someone who destroyed your life because they loved you?" I testified before the state medical board regarding Dr. Raymond Fletcher's handling of my case. The investigation revealed that Patricia had fed him specific information designed to confirm a schizophrenia diagnosis, that he'd accepted her characterization of my symptoms without independent verification, and that he'd failed to consider alternative explanations for my experiences. Fletcher lost his medical license for ethical violations related to biased diagnosis and failure to maintain professional objectivity. Lucas and I both needed extensive therapy after everything was over. I worked with Dr. Samantha Kowalski, no relation to the judge, who specialized in gaslighting recovery and reality testing after psychological manipulation. Quote, 8. Dr. Kowalski explained during one session. Quote, 89. Lucas worked with trauma specialists who helped him process 3 years of captivity and the betrayal of being imprisoned by his own mother. He returned to school eventually, finished his engineering degree, and landed a position at a renewable energy company in Oregon. We talked weekly, maintained the friendship that Patricia had tried to destroy, but we never discussed living in the same city again. Some experiences leave scars that require distance to heal. I wrote a book about the experience, not for profit, but to document what happened and potentially help others who've been gaslighted by family members. The book was titled The Basement: How My Aunt Convinced Everyone I Was Schizophrenic to Hide My Cousin's Imprisonment. It became a minor bestseller in true crime circles, and I used the proceeds to start a nonprofit helping families navigate situations where someone is being labeled mentally ill as a means of control or cover-up. 2 years after Patricia's sentencing, I received a letter from her prison's psychiatric unit. She wanted to meet with me as part of her therapy to make amends and take accountability. I declined through my attorney. Some people don't deserve the opportunity to explain themselves, and Patricia had already said everything I needed to hear in that basement confession I'd recorded. She'd stolen 3 years of Lucas's life and nearly destroyed mine because she couldn't accept that her son wanted independence. That wasn't love. That was pathological control. Last month, Lucas called me at 11:42 p.m., which was unusual. We usually talked during daylight hours. "I got promoted to senior engineer," he said, "leading a team on a major wind farm project in Montana." His voice carried genuine happiness, the kind that had been missing for years. "And Ethan, I bought a house. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. It has big windows everywhere. I can see outside from every room." That detail, windows in every room, made my throat tight. After 3 years in a basement without natural light, Lucas had bought a house designed around visibility and escape routes. We'd both been changed by what Patricia did, but we'd survived. "I'm proud of you," I said. "You rebuilt everything she tried to destroy." "We both did," Lucas replied. "You saved my life by refusing to accept their narrative about your mental health. If you'd believed them, if you'd stayed on the medication and stopped questioning, I'd still be in that basement, or I'd be dead." We talked for another 30 minutes about his project, his team, his plans for the house. Normal conversation between cousins who'd survived something abnormal together. After we hung up, I pulled out the voice recorder I'd used to capture Patricia's confession. I keep it in my desk drawer, a physical reminder that sometimes the truth sounds insane until you have proof. I pressed play and listened to Patricia's voice one more time. "Ethan's upstairs right now, medicated and docile, finally accepting that you're dead. I broke him, just like I broke you." She'd been so certain of her control, so confident that she'd successfully destroyed my credibility and Lucas's hope. But she'd underestimated 2 things: my refusal to completely abandon my own perceptions, even under immense pressure, and Lucas's determination to survive long enough to be found. Patricia Brennan is serving 45 years in federal prison. Lucas Brennan is designing wind farms in Montana. And I'm writing this from my office at the nonprofit I founded, helping other people whose families have tried to convince them their reality isn't real. The voice through the heating vent was real. Lucas was alive. And sometimes, the person everyone calls crazy is actually the only one telling the truth. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.